Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars on the Solicitors Qualifying Examination, or SQE. This webinar is on the topic of qualifying work experience, or QWE as we usually call it. My name is Maxine Waugh and I'm Head of Education and Training at the SRA. And I'm joined today by my colleague Richard Williams, who is a policy manager at the SRA, and he's also our resident expert on all things qualifying work experience, so we are in very good hands today. So the requirement for qualifying work experience has been in place for a couple of years now, but we know that it's an area that law firms and other employers still have questions about, and so do candidates. And we did run a webinar back in March where we heard from employers and from an SQE candidate about qualifying work experience and how it works in practice in their organisation. And this webinar is available on our YouTube channel if you're interested in that. But the purpose of today's webinar is to go back to basics on qualifying work experience. We're going to look at what qualifying work experience is, what it isn't, how you can meet our requirements, how you can get the most from qualifying work experience. So today's session is focusing mainly on qualifying work experience from the regulatory perspective. We are able to take questions as usual during the webinar, so please do post them in the link below the webinar if you have any. We might not cover all of them, but we will cover as many of them as we can. And we have also had some questions in advance, so we will cover some of those as we go through the session. The other thing I'd like to say is that we will answer your questions, but it won't be possible for us to answer bespoke questions about people's individual personal circumstances. That's really a matter for you to determine. But we will do our best to try and explain as much as possible as we can about qualifying work experience to help you with answering those questions. And then finally, before I hand over to Richard, we do also have a feedback form, which you'll find in the link below this webinar. I will remind you again at the end, but please do take the time to fill out that form for us. Anyway, let's get started. Richard, let's start right at the very beginning. What do we mean by qualifying work experience?
Thanks, Maxine. So in terms of what we mean by qualifying work experience, individuals who want to be admitted as a solicitor under the SQE route will need to complete a period of qualifying work experience. So just to set some context before I go into what qualifying work experience is, qualifying work experience is a really important part of our reforms when we introduced the SQE, and it was intended to provide more flexibility for aspiring solicitors to qualify than the old training contract system. And I'm sure everyone will have heard the term the training contract bottleneck. So in terms of what qualifying work experience is, it's any experience of providing legal services that enables enables an individual to develop some or all of the competencies as outlined in the statement of solicitor competence. And those competencies are assessed in the SQE. It must be a minimum of 2 years and can be obtained in no more than 4 organisations. It needs to be confirmed by a solicitor or compliance officer for legal practice, COLP for short, who we regulate. And we'll come on to talk a lot about confirmation later in this webinar. Going back to my kind of point about greater flexibility, so qualified work experience can be obtained from a current role, or it can be obtained retrospectively from a previous role that you might well have had that was delivering legal services and meets our criteria. In terms of where it can be obtained, so it can be obtained in kind of employment in England or Wales or overseas, and it does not need to cover English or Welsh law. So that means you can obtain it in-house, in a traditional law firm, in a law clinic, working in an in-house team of a kind of a local government, etc. So as long as you're kind of providing legal services and you meet those other kind of conditions, there isn't kind of a specific restriction on the type of organisation. Just in terms of if you're a qualified lawyer, it's important to point out that qualifying work experience doesn't apply to you. You don't have to complete our requirements around qualifying work experience. And finally, it can be completed or obtained before or after taking the SQE assessment. But I think in kind of thinking through how that might well apply to you or any individuals that you might well have obtaining qualifying work experience in your organisation, I think the important point is to think about, okay, well, if those competencies if competencies are being assessed in SQE2, do you or does the person have enough exposure to them? So quite a lot there, but we'll unpick some of it as we go along, Maxine.
Thanks, Richard. And you didn't mention apprenticeships there, Richard. What about apprenticeships? Is qualifying work experience included within an apprenticeship?
Absolutely. So your apprenticeship essentially will cover all of those criteria.
Great, thank you, Richard. And I'm sure some people are wondering, why do we have qualifying work experience? What's the purpose of it?
Yep, it's a good question. So qualifying work experience is really important because it provides any aspiring solicitor with experience of legal work. It also provides them with experience of or an opportunity to experience and develop some of the competencies required to be a newly qualified solicitor, and also those that are assessed in SQE2. So it's really kind of socializing individuals to working in a legal environment and giving them the kind of preparation in terms of the skills required to be a solicitor through the SQE.
Thanks very much, Richard. And what does qualifying work experience mean for the training contract or the period of recognised training as we had under the old system? Is it the end of the training contract as we know it?
From a purely regulatory perspective, it is the end of it. So we don't require a training contract for admission under the SQE route. So instead of a training contract, you'll need to complete qualifying work experience. And this is one of the big benefits of qualifying work experience. It opens up the opportunities for people to accumulate this experience and obviously then obtain qualifying work experience, which gives them a better chance of entering the profession. But just to point out that although period of recognised training isn't a regulatory requirement, some organisations may still choose to offer a period of recognised training or something similar to it. But that's a decision for them rather than us as a regulator, because as I said, it's not a requirement for admission under the SQE route.
Thanks, Richard. And you've said already that qualifying work experience is any experience of providing legal services, and we get asked quite a lot, and indeed we've had some questions already in from people about what actually counts as qualifying work experience. How do people know whether their experience counts or not? Can you give us some tips?
Absolutely. We can't prescribe exactly what qualifying work experience looks like because, there are so many organisations that fall under that kind of umbrella of providing legal services. So it'd be really difficult to prescribe a definition that suits everybody's. But if you are thinking about, okay, getting some kind of validation of whether a particular role or a particular function in an organisation fits within the definition of qualifying work experience, then a really good place to start is looking at the definition of legal activity in the Legal Services Act. So I think that's section 12, and that will give you a kind of a list of activities which will help you understand whether or not a role or function aligns with that kind of definition. So that's a really good starting point for people. A couple of other points just on this. So qualifying work experience must be real life work, and by that we mean it can't be simulated legal work, because simulated legal work won't count. So you could have been a paralegal, you could be a trainee, a volunteer in a law clinic, law firm, in-house, or a voluntary sector organisation. Really, the title doesn't matter. The key thing for you or for organisations offering qualifying work experience is to understand whether the role or the job that someone's doing broadly aligns with that definition of legal services.
That's great. Thanks, Richard. And a question we get asked a lot, Richard, and in fact, we've had a question in about this from Sue, is how do we calculate qualifying work experience if somebody is working part-time?
Yeah, we get asked this question quite a lot, and kind of going back to my previous answer, given the depth and breadth of organisations where and roles and functions where qualifying work experience, may be able to be claimed, again, we can't set a prescriptive formula across all of those organisations. So it's very much up for the employers or the organisation to think about what works for them in terms of working out what part-time or equivalent is. And lots of organizations will already have part-time staff, and that gives them a really good starting point to work out any kind of equivalent in terms of QWE.
Thank you. And you've touched on this a little bit, Richard, but let's just clarify it a little bit more. When can qualifying work experience take place? So, for example, could it take place even before somebody's done their SQE1 assessment?
Yes, it can. It can be taken before, in between, or after. But I think, we think in terms of it being taken before qualifying work, before SQE1, that's likely to be that won't be typical. We think that most candidates will do it between SQE1 and SQE2, given the nature of the SQE2 assessment in terms of assessing. So there's practical skills, but it can be done at any point in qualification. I think perhaps the most likely scenario for someone doing it before SQE1 is if perhaps they're a paralegal and they've got years worth of kind of legal service background, and they might just want to say, okay, well, look, I know I met all the criteria. I'm just obtaining my qualifying work experience now. I'm banking it, and then I'm going off to do my SQE 1 and 2 assessments.
That's great, thank you. And you've talked a little bit already about the competencies that people need to get during their qualifying work experience. And that's obviously a critical part of qualifying work experience. We get asked quite a lot, how many competencies does somebody need to count towards their qualifying work experience? Is there a magic number, for example?
So our regulations do not require someone to develop all of the competencies. I think the regulations talk about some or some or all, but it's certainly we don't expect anyone to develop absolutely all of them. I think in terms of there being a kind of a minimum number, I think by some it probably defaults to 2 as a minimum, and we won't prescribe which competencies they are. But I think the really important message here is perhaps not to get too fixated on a number. It's really about thinking through what competencies you've been exposed to, which competencies you haven't been exposed to, and what you may need to do in order to best prepare yourself for the SQE assessment. I think it's a qualifying work experience. I talked about kind of socializing. It's a learning opportunity here, isn't it? This is about you understanding what it is in order to be a solicitor. So, those types of skills and knowledge are assessed through the SQE. So, qualifying work experience should be viewed as an opportunity to get as much of that learning as possible. That's going to put you in a really good position to pass the SQE assessment. So I think, think about, rather than think of a minimum number, think about what is it is going to put you in the driving seat in terms of passing the SQE assessment.
And how would people work out whether they've been exposed to these competencies or not? Is there a list?
There is, and a really good place to start, and I mentioned it at the very beginning, is our statement of solicitor competence. That it outlines all of the competencies required of a newly qualified solicitor. We've also produced a template, And what that template does is kind of list all the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence, and then allows you to fill in how you've met them or whether or not you need kind of further exposure, etc. So both those documents are obviously available on our website. So I suggest that people take a look at those in terms of helping them understand where there might be gaps in terms of their exposure.
And we've had a question in, Richard, from somebody who's asking whether you have to do contentious work experience as part of your qualifying work experience. Now, that's something you used to have to do under the old LPC system, but do you have to do it under qualifying work experience?
No, absolutely not. That kind of prescription, as you've mentioned, of the old regime of qualification has been removed. It's very much about, if the work that you're doing sits under that umbrella term of qualifying work in terms of legal services, and it meets all of the other criteria, it can really be anything. So yeah, absolutely no contentious or non-contentious work needs to be completed.
Great, thank you, Richard. I'm sure we've got some employers watching us today, and I'm sure employers want to make sure they offer good quality work experience. Have you got any advice for them on, what does good quality work experience look like?
Yeah, we have issued some guidance and resources for organisations who might want to employ a solicitor who might well be kind of obtaining qualifying work experience. Again, that's on our website, but I just wanted to pull out, I suppose, a couple of key headline tips really for them. So going back to the kind of point I just mentioned, so think about how you might well be able to offer individuals exposure to a diverse and varied kind of portfolio of work that enables them to gain exposure to a wide range of competencies that are assessed in SQE2. So I think a placement that mostly offers repetitive and limited administrative tasks is unlikely to achieve that. But that being said, if that's the kind of work you do, there might well be other opportunities for individuals outside of your organisation to get exposure to further competencies, for example, volunteering at a law clinic. So something to think about there. I think it's really important that individuals have some exposure to kind of professionalism and ethical issues, because they are assessed across both SQE1 and SQE2 assessments. Going back to that kind of point about socialisation, I think there's something about kind of learning from experienced role models in your organisation, seeing how they behave ethically and in accordance with our codes of conduct in difficult cases. Good supervision is important in terms of getting the most out of qualifying work experience. Those kind of pointers about what you could maybe able to do better are always very helpful. And then I think, giving people kind of, I suppose, sort of set piece opportunities for them to think about kind of what they're doing, identify their strengths and weaknesses, and also to think about, okay, well, what else is it I might need to be exposed to, or where are those gaps, are all really good approaches that organisations can use to really kind of get the best out of qualifying work experience for them and for the people that are going through it.
Thanks, Richard. We've had a question in about recording qualifying work experience. So we don't prescribe how people should do that, do we? But have you got any tips on recording qualifying work experience?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit early on. We've got a template on our website. It's pretty easy to use. As I said, it just lists all the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence, and you can kind of populate how you've met it and the evidence you've got to support that. So I think that's a really good tool for people. Again, it's not a requirement you use that, but it might be something that helps some people and other organisations. I think going back to kind of good practice for firms as well, I think our expectation is that there would be firms would be kind of really supporting individuals to collate any relevant evidence in recording their qualifying work experience as well. And again, there's more information in that guidance for employers I mentioned.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. Let's move on now to talk about confirming qualifying work experience, because Of course, that's one of the biggest changes from the old system, where the training contract used to be signed off by a training principal, and it's an area where we still get lots of questions. So you said earlier that qualifying work experience needs to be confirmed either by a solicitor or by a compliance officer, or a COLP as we regularly call them. What are they confirming when they sign off qualifying work experience?
Okay, so let's just unpick this a little bit more. So a solicitor or COLP is confirming for the placement or role or period of qualifying work experience looking to be confirmed, that experience provided the opportunity to develop some or all of the competencies that we've talked about, that the time scale of the period or role being claimed was correct and accurate, and that there are no character and suitability issues from that placement that would raise a question about the suitability of an individual to become a solicitor. So a lot of that confirmation is quite practical, really, isn't it? It's a kind of, is the time correct? Are there the right kind of kind of character and suitability? Are, based on kind of evidence presented, these competencies had exposure to? So I think, our view is that by and large, qualified work experience should be confirmed more times than not, really. Just to point out as well that just because a solicitor or COLP confirms someone's qualifying work experience, it does not mean that they are then kind of rubber stamping that individual to be admitted as a solicitor. Qualifying work experience is kind of one of the 4 criteria that need to be met in order to become a solicitor. So just because you're confirming qualifying work experience doesn't mean they automatically become a solicitor. They will need to pass SQE1 and SQE2 also. Kind of picking up on that theme of kind of good practice for organisations as well. It's probably good to be really clear about in your organisation who is going to be the person or the function or department who's going to be responsible for confirming qualifying work experience. Is it the person perhaps line managing or supervising them, or is it perhaps more centralised within a HR function, for example? So always good to be clear about that. And if that changes, then kind of let people know as well.
So just to be clear, Richard, because there is quite a lot of confusion about the sign off, the confirming of qualifying work experience. Solicitors and COLPs that are confirming qualifying work experience, are they making a judgment about the individual's competence?
No, absolutely not. As I said, confirmation is about length of time. It's about some or all the competencies have been met, and providing information about any character and suitabilities if they are. It is not about deciding whether, in the opinion of the confirming solicitor or COLP, that individual is competent or should be a solicitor. That's the role. That's our role as the regulator, and that's the role of the SQE to determine that. It also kind of doesn't mean that you're making any judgments about the quality of their work, the quality of their training, the quality of their experience, nor making a judgment actually about whether they are of the right character and suitability or not. In terms of character and suitability, we just want to know what the issues are. If you think there is an issue, there's an opportunity for you to tell us. It will be our decision as the regulator to determine whether that information that you've provided, should restrict someone from becoming a solicitor. So really, I think the key takeaway is, look, you can be relatively comfortable in signing off qualifying work experience so long as you've got assurances that the information that is presented is accurate. Don't worry about you having to put kind of a professional judgment into that, because it really isn't necessary and it's not required.
And I know that solicitors or COLPs who are watching this will probably be concerned about how they can make sure they meet our requirements when they're confirming QWE. How do they do that? How do they make sure they meet our requirements?
Okay. again, we've got guidance directly for anyone confirming qualifying work experience on our website. So I'd encourage anyone to have a look at that, but I'll just kind of pull out a couple of takeaways from that. So, you know, if you're a solicitor or cop and you're confirming qualifying work experience, you know, you've got wider, broader regulatory principles and obligations to comply with, and that is kind of acting honestly, fairly at all times, and not to abuse your kind of position by taking an unfair advantage of an individual. So, you know, I suppose what that means in practice is if you shouldn't really be refusing to confirm qualifying work experience if it meets our criteria. I think, you know, that's something to think about. And I think you know, it's also good to just kind of be open and transparent with people as well. You know, if you think you haven't got quite enough information to help you as a confirming solicitor make a confirmation in line with your professional kind of wider regulatory obligations, have a conversation with someone, explain why you can't do it, and give them kind of an idea of what you want as well. So there's two things that I think will help you kind of comply with your regulatory objectives.
Thanks, Richard. And have you got any other advice for firms, you know, a firm that's thinking about what their approach should be to qualifying work experience and confirming it? Have you got any other advice for them?
Yeah, and again, kind of, we can't really prescribe a one-size-fits-all approach here, but I think, you know, it's really worth thinking about a couple of things, really. One of them being, and it might be quite painful to do in the first instance, but once you've done it, it makes life a lot easier. So, you know, it's worth thinking about what roles or functions within your firm or organization fit within that definition of legal services. So you can say, well, actually, we think these roles fit within, and therefore that if you're doing those roles, it might well be qualifying work experience. These roles may not. So, for example, you know, you may well be working in legal services, but doing an IT job, and that's unlikely to be qualifying work experience. So thinking through what roles and functions kind of constitute qualifying work experience is a good starting point. And then thinking about who's going to confirm it. You know, and I kind of mentioned that, you know, is it a line manager? Is it a supervisor? Is it a head of? Is it something more centralized? So think about what works for you and how best you can implement that. And then I think just being clear what the process is will help as well.
Thanks, Richard. And just to be clear, it has to be a CULP or a solicitor from England and Wales who signs off the qualifying work experience. It can't, for example, be a lawyer qualified in another jurisdiction or another regulated lawyer in the UK. It has to be a solicitor.
That's correct. So yeah, it's a solicitor or CULP we regulate.
Yeah, thank you. And you've talked about this already a little bit, Richard, but let's just go back to it because I think it's important. We do hear, don't we, from candidates who contact us and say, you know, their employer won't sign off their qualifying work experience. Is this allowed? Are they allowed to say they won't sign it off?
As I said, probably more times than not, we would expect qualifying work experience to be confirmed. So, you know, as I've said, solicitors and CULPs have a regulatory obligation to act honestly and not take advantage. So, you know, that kind of underpins a lot of this. You know, in doing so, I think it's fair enough for a solicitor to state sort of the evidence that they'd want to see that would enable them to confirm someone's qualifying work experience. You know, I totally understand that this is a kind of an important regulatory action or process, and a solicitor must be satisfied that, you know, that they've got the right information in order to do that. But that being said, kind of qualifying work experience should be confirmed, notwithstanding any concerns an individual may have about an individual's competence or their character and suitability. But I think if you know, for any kind of solicitors or CULPs who are involved in confirming qualifying work experience, if you do have any kind of questions or concerns, I think probably worth dropping our ethics team align as well, because they can help you talk through some of the concerns that you might well have.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. We've had questions in both from Simran and from Cassie about confirming retrospective qualifying work experience. So can people, for example, claim qualifying work experience from a previous job or a role that they did a number of years ago, for example? How does that work?
Yep, absolutely. And again, this is kind of one of the benefits of the qualifying work experience, is that you can go back and think about kind of jobs that you did previously. So it can be claimed retrospectively. There isn't a limit on how far you can go back in order to claim qualifying work experience, so long as that particular role meets our criteria and so long as it can be confirmed. And I think we'll come on to talk a little bit about perhaps some of the challenges about retrospective confirmation. So I think kind of important, if you are a solicitor or CULP confirming kind of retrospective qualifying work experience, to kind of think about what we're saying in terms of what good practice looks like. So we would expect solicitors and CULPs to take reasonable and appropriate steps to confirm any kind of retrospective requests. And I think what this means in practice is probably, having a conversation with the HR department to confirm their details or experience, or trying to get a kind of a job description for the role being claimed as qualifying work experience, or talking to someone who might well be involved in the delivery of that work. So there's some helpful tips there. But as I said, it might not always be possible to confirm qualifying work experience from a retrospective request, even if you have taken those appropriate steps, because there may not be any records of a particular individual working for your organisation. The retrospective kind of claim goes beyond the organisation's data retention period, or there might not be anyone still around from the period of time in which the individual is looking to claim qualifying work experience. So those are probably some examples of where it's probably legitimate for a solicitor to say, look, I really can't confirm qualifying work experience. But again, as I've discussed, probably be open and transparent about that, explain why you can't confirm it.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Richard. And we quite often get asked from solicitors or CULPs, what sort of engagement will they have from the SRA when they're confirming their qualifying work experience? And so we've put together a little video which will help people understand what it looks like when they're confirming qualifying work experience. So I think we're going to show that video right now.
Log into your mySRA account and go to Start a New Application. Search for the application or type in Notify. Select Notify us of your qualifying work experience. Once you are ready to start, click Record Work Experience. Please check all boxes to confirm you have read and understood each statement. Click Continue. Now provide the organisation details by searching for their name or SRA ID number. Select the organisation and click Continue. Now confirm the office you have worked at. Click Save and Continue. Now select the type of employment. Click Save and Continue. Fill in your start date, end date, and confirming if it was full-time, part-time, and how long it was for. Now click Save and Continue. Enter the solicitor's name or SRA number. This must be a solicitor of England and Wales. Now click Save and Continue. This is the summary page of your application. Now before you submit, you have the opportunity to edit each section, and when you're ready, click Save and Continue. Click I have read and understood the declaration, then click Submit. Your application has been submitted and a notification has been sent to the appointed solicitor. Once they have confirmed, you will receive an email notification confirming the results. When confirming qualifying work experience, you will receive an email asking you to log into your mySRA account and review the requests. Once you are in your mySRA account, you will be taken to the Actions page. You can also navigate to this page via the Actions tab within mySRA. Click on the relevant application and click Review the requests. You will be asked to confirm a period of time for the applicant. Once ready, click View under Actions and read their application. Please also confirm any character and suitability issues, if any. Once you have read through the application and you're satisfied, click I have read and understood the declaration and click Confirm Period of QWE. Now that the application has been granted, the applicant will receive a notification confirming the results.
Hopefully you found that useful, and it took away a little bit of the mystery about what happens when you have to confirm qualifying work experience. I'm just going to go to a question that we have received from somebody, which is about what happens if there's nobody in your organisation who can confirm your qualifying work experience, or whether somebody can confirm qualifying work experience for someone who's outside of their organisation. Can you tell us how this works, Richard?
Yeah. So yeah, I think in most cases it's, it will be a solicitor within an organisation that will confirm qualifying work experience. But we know that some organisations who might fit within that kind of the umbrella of qualifying work experience may not have a solicitor or culp in the organisation, or the individual who's obtaining qualifying work experience doesn't have access to a solicitor able to confirm it. So qualifying work experience can be confirmed by a solicitor that does not work within the organisation where the individual is undertaking their qualifying work experience. But in doing so, a solicitor or culp kind of outside of the organisation will need to have reviewed the work of the individual during the relevant period of work experience and receive feedback from a person or persons supervising their work. So there are opportunities if you don't have access to a solicitor to get it confirmed, subject to those two steps being satisfied.
Thanks, Richard. Let's move on now, Richard, to talk about recruitment and retention. We've had a few questions in from firms about paralegals and asking whether if a paralegal does their qualifying work experience and then passes the SQE, does the firm have to employ them as a solicitor? What's the answer to this?
The answer is that it's a decision for the employer. It's up to them to decide whether they employ an individual who's been admitted as a solicitor, or whether they continue to employ them in the role that they held or hold before kind of passing the SQE and becoming admitted as a solicitor. So it's a business decision rather than one for us as a regulator. I think, though, we would say that if you're a firm that we regulate, or actually any organisation, it's kind of good employment practice to have those kind of early, open and honest conversations with people about whether or not there is a solicitor role for them once they have qualified. I think that's probably the key takeaway for handling that situation.
And if an employer decides not to employ someone who's qualified as a solicitor, does that person still need to be called a solicitor if they're on our roll of solicitors, even if they're not doing the job of a solicitor?
Again, the kind of job titles here are a matter for the employer, providing it's not misleading to the client. So I think that's one important consideration. If an organisation decides to continue to employ an individual who is qualified through the SQE in a non-solicitor role, for example, as a paralegal, they would still need to comply with our regulatory requirements for solicitors. So the individual, for example, will need a practicing certificate and will be subject to our kind of continuing competence obligations, for example.
And we talked a bit about paralegals who typically wouldn't be on a structured career development pathway within a firm or another organisation. What advice can you give to organisations who about dealing with individuals who want to use their experience as qualifying work experience, but they're not on what would typically be a sort of structured training contract type route?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very kind of common question from lots of different organisations, both that we regulate and don't. So I think going back to basics here, if their experience meets the criteria for qualifying work experience, we would expect it to be confirmed. So I think that's the first point. But a lot of this, as I've said, just comes down to sort of good employment practice and business practice, really. It's up to you to think about how you managing your employees and their kind of career development and expectations. So I think it all comes down to kind of how and when you will communicate with people, what's available, what is going to be considered as a kind of pathway to becoming a solicitor or not. So again, lots more information in our guidance on our website if people are interested in how they can handle that.
And listening to you, Richard, I think some employers might be thinking, this isn't relevant to us because we're not planning on taking on any new staff. We're not in a position to train people up under qualifying work experience, so it's not relevant to us. But actually, this change has the potential to be relevant to all firms and organisations and solicitors, doesn't it?
It does, and I think if we talk about kind of focus on sort of retrospective claims as well. So then that might well be one area where an organisation that perhaps may not have currently, but may have done in the past, employed perhaps kind of what we call trainees, might well have to consider how they confirm it. But I think there are also big opportunities here for organisations that traditionally haven't taken on, I suppose, kind of trainees, for want of a better word, to consider whether the flexibility that qualifying work experience gives them an opportunity to take people on, to offer people kind of career progression pathways in line with their business objectives. We've heard from, say, some smaller firms actually that they're looking to work in consortiums to offer placements for people, and this benefits the firm because they get some extra hands in and extra support and help, but also kind of benefits the individual because it gives them an opportunity to obtain kind of potentially quite a diverse exposure to competencies. So we also know as well, I think this is quite an important point, particularly in terms of recruitment, is that we speak to a lot of kind of aspiring solicitors and candidates, and a lot of people now are looking at whether there are opportunities to obtain qualifying work experience going with particular firms or not. So I think that's something to think about. So even if you don't want to think about the opportunities, I still think you'll need to consider, what happens if someone that you currently employ wants to claim qualifying work experience, and how you're going to manage retrospective claims.
So I'm sure there'll be some employers that are listening to this who are thinking, qualifying work experience, it's just not for us. We're not interested in providing qualifying work experience. If they feel like that, can a firm actually advertise a job or a role and say it won't count towards your qualifying work experience?
I think the advice here is that, if you're going to do that, you really need to be 100% sure that that particular role has absolutely no exposure to kind of the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence. So you're going back to kind of that exercise that I talked about at the beginning. If you've done that and you can say, well, this role doesn't touch any of the competencies, then yeah, you can probably do that, but you need to done that thinking first, I think. But I think going back to kind of that point I just talked about, it might well be advantageous actually for firms to think about whether kind of their roles offer qualifying work experience and to offer it as qualifying work experience, because as I said, people are really looking, aspiring solicitors are really looking now at what's going to give them the best opportunities to get exposure to sort of the competencies and skills that are assessed in the QWE when making kind of decisions about their kind of career and how they qualify as a solicitor.
And what about recruitment? We've talked about recruitment here. Does qualifying work experience have any impact on how employers might recruit in the future?
Absolutely. It offers a lot more flexibility. We've talked a lot about the prescription of the kind of previous qualification regime being removed, and I think that flexibility gives people the opportunity to take advantage of it. So I think there's probably a few questions that organizations might want to think about. What does this mean for your existing staff? Are there paralegals that you can think, okay, actually we can use qualifying work experience to develop these and to get them to a position where they could be a solicitor within our organisation? We talked very briefly at the very beginning about apprenticeships. Again, is an opportunity to take on an apprentice and offer an apprenticeship here. Is an opportunity to work with other firms. For those that kind of not able to, who haven't been able to offer a training contract, I think there's a lot of opportunity for here. And then a kind of I suppose picking up on the theme that I've mentioned in my last two kind of answers is how can you use what you do as a firm and qualifying work experience to attract kind of the best talent to your organisation.
And you mentioned apprentices again there, Richard. Just to be clear, because somebody has asked a question about this. At the moment, solicitor apprenticeships are currently not available in Wales. They're only available in England. So I just wanted to make that clear. Finally then, Richard, let's just talk about what support is available to help organisations and individuals understand and implement qualifying work experience.
Yeah, we've thought very long and hard about this, Maxine, over the last, I suppose, kind of couple of years, and there is an awful lot of information on our website around what you might want to think about, how you can meet your regulatory requirements, what good looks like in practice, and that's both from the perspective of an organisation maybe offering qualifying work experience, but also from the perspective of an individual looking to obtain it as well. So on the slide there is lots and lots and lots of ways which you can access that information. So if anyone has any kind of further questions, it might well be a good starting point to have a dive through that. And we've got at least 6, 7, 8 other webinars featuring predominantly you and me, Maxine, on our YouTube channel, where we go into a lot more of this detail. So have a look at those as well, because I think they're all very, very useful sources.
Thanks, Richard. And just to clarify that those resources and the template that you mentioned earlier are all available on our on-demand page, and we will send out a link to that to anyone who registered via the link to this webinar. Let's have a quick look at some of the questions that have come in, Richard. We've answered some of them as we've gone through, but we've had a few in throughout the session. One question that we got asked is, are there specific job titles that attach to qualifying work experience? Do you have to have a particular position in order for your role to count as qualifying work experience?
No, it's not. This isn't about job titles. This is about the work that is being carried out. So if the work that is being carried out fits within, I suppose, the definition of providing legal services, then it can be used, subject to the other criteria, as qualifying work experience, irrespective of job title.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. And a really quick one. I don't think we've covered it in today's session. I know we've covered it in previous sessions, but somebody's asking, is it possible for qualifying work experience that is undertaken outside of the UK to count?
It can be, yeah. It doesn't have to be in the law of England and Wales. I think if you are in that position, it's just probably worth remembering that, the qualifying work experience will need to be signed off by a solicitor or COP we regulate.
Thanks, Richard. And we've had another question in from John, who runs a law clinic, and says, does the law clinic have to be registered with the SRA to confirm qualifying work experience?
No, I don't know. I think, you know, what we're saying here is, you know, any organisation that provides legal services can offer qualifying work experience. That being said, going back to kind of the previous point, you know, it will need to be confirmed by a solicitor in the Wales, and, you know, and as you can see by the video, they will need to be you'll need to be able to state who that is in order for it to be confirmed. But yeah, you don't have to kind of register with us. You know, it could be kind of a law clinic or any other organisation, really.
Thank you. And we've had another question in from an employer who must use the traditional sort of seat rotation where their candidates go around doing different areas of practice. And their question is, do they have to sign off the qualifying work experience after each seat, or can they just wait until the end and sign everything off at the end?
It's a really good question. I'm working on the assumption in answering that all of those seats are within the same organisation. So you know, it's really a matter for them, to be honest. I think in that occasion or example, it might just be worth kind of waiting to the end, but also thinking about how you kind of collate the evidence that you've met the competencies as you go along. And again, it depends on how long that period takes as well. You know, if that rotation only takes 6 months, then obviously that individual would need to obtain a further period of time in order to make it up to the 2 years.
Thanks, Richard. And we'll take one final question. We've had a question about can a solicitor who's regulated by the SRA but working in a non-SRA regulated organisation, can they still sign off qualifying work experience if they don't work in an SRA regulated organisation?
Yep, absolutely. You know, again, this is the ability to confirm qualifying work experience kind of follows the individual rather than the organisation. So yeah, and so long as they're regulated by us, they could be working in a, you know, say private in-house, a commercial company, for example, and they can sign off qualifying work experience. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Richard. I'm going to end it there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you found it helpful and useful. As we said, please do refer to our resources on our website. If you found it useful, there are other webinars available. This webinar will be available on YouTube, as all our other ones are. And also a reminder, please, to complete the feedback form, which is in the link underneath this webinar. We do read them, we are interested in them, we genuinely find them helpful, so please do take the time to complete it. And also let us know if there's any other topics that you would find useful for these kind of sessions. But I'm going to leave it there, and thank you very much for listening.